The cell, better the box, was cooled down to the point that I was shaking most of the time. For the next 70 days, I wouldn't know the sweetness of sleeping. Interrogation 24 hours a day. I was living literally in terror.
There's no reason for Mohamedou to be in Guantanamo. Mohamedou has never been charged with a crime. He's been in Guantanamo now 14 years. It's not that they haven't found the evidence against him. There isn't any evidence against him. Mohamedou started writing in 2005. He had prepared 90 pages in a notebook that the guards had given him. That was the beginning of this manuscript.
For a number of years, his attorneys conduct litigation and negotiations to get that manuscript declassified.
Mohamedou is somewhat of a modern Renaissance man. He is from the country of Mauritania. He's from a very poor family, but he won a scholarship to study in Germany as a very young man.
Mohamedou had joined al-Qaeda in the early 1990s. Like many young men, he had gone to Afghanistan as a student to join the fight against the communist government of Afghanistan. And to join the fight, you had to train at an al-Qaeda camp, and he had trained and he had sworn loyalty to them. But as he's said repeatedly, he broke all ties after the communist government collapsed and the various Mujahideen factions started shooting each other. Mohamedou essentially said, "I'm out."
Mohamedou was at his mother's house in November of 2001, and he gets a call from the police to come and be interviewed. And he literally, I'm sure, told his mother, "I'll be right back." And he disappeared, and his family has never seen him again to this day.
There's a missing piece to the 9/11 Commission report's puzzle, something that has not been brought up by the 9/11 Truth Movement. Why would they? They don't even believe that anybody hijacked any planes, much less have Arab components to the puzzle. The missing piece starts with a detainee that has been released in the last 5 years. His name is Mohamedou Ould Slahi. According to many sources, Mohamedou Ould Slahi was considered a high-value al-Qaeda detainee, somebody who met members of the Hamburg Cell, like Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shibh, and Ziya Jarrah in Germany, and persuaded them to entertain the war in Afghanistan rather than in Chechnya. Slahi was then arrested by Yemeni detained authorities, where he was then transferred over to the FBI and then to the CIA. But a little bit about Slahi's background. Slahi himself received a scholarship from the Karl Duisberg Society to study in West Germany, where he earned an electrical engineering degree from the University of Duisburg. He then traveled to Afghanistan to join the Mujahideen, fighting against the communist central government under Rabinu Nabali. The United States had supported the Mujahideen against the Soviet occupation starting in 1979, and through Operation Cyclone, a CIA operation, funded billions of dollars in weapons and aid to the freedom fighters through the Pakistan ISI. After the Soviet withdrawal in 1989, there was a civil war between Mohammad Najibullah's government and the Afghan Mujahideen. Slahi had trained several weeks at the al-Farouk training camp near Khost, which was run by al-Qaeda. At the end of his training in March of 1991, he swore bayat, which is loyalty, to al-Qaeda, and was given the kunya, a nom de guerre of Abu Musab. However, he did not participate in the civil war. Instead, he returned to Germany. In February of 1992, Slahi traveled again to Afghanistan and was assigned to a mortar battery in Gardez. 6 weeks later, the Najibullah government regime fell, and he returned back to Germany. In hearings in Guantanamo, Slahi has stated that he traveled to Afghanistan twice, attended the al-Farouk training camp, and fought against the Afghan central government in 1992, but that he was never an enemy combatant against the United States. In fact, he was fighting on the same side as the United States, which in 1992 supported the Mujahideen against the communist government in Afghanistan. Well, what probably got Slahi in trouble was that Slahi's cousin, the former brother-in-law, is Mahfouz Ould al-Walid, better known as Abu Hafs al-Murtani. Before the September 11, 2001 attacks in the United States, it was al-Walid who was a spiritual advisor to Osama bin Laden and was on the Shura Council of al-Qaeda and even headed the Shura Council. However, 2 months before the attacks, al-Walid, along with several other al-Qaeda members, wrote a letter to bin Laden opposing the plane's operation. Al-Walid left al-Qaeda after the attacks. While al-Walid was in the Sudan, where al-Qaeda was based in the mid-1990s, he twice asked Mohamedou Ould Slahi to help him get money to his family in Mauritania, about $4,000 in December of 1997 and another $4,000 in December of 1998. In the 2010 habeas corpus opinion for Slahi, the judge wrote that the government relies on nothing but Slahi's uncorroborated coerced statements to conclude that the money transfers were done on behalf of and in support of al-Qaeda. In 1998, Slahi was heard by U.S. intelligence talking to al-Walid on a satellite phone traced to bin Laden. This was the NSA. The 9/11 Commission report, based on the interrogations of Ramzi bin al-Shibh, claimed that in 1999, Slahi advised 3 members of the Hamburg Cell to travel to Afghanistan to obtain training before waging jihad in Chechnya. However, the federal district court in 2010 that reviewed Slahi's case found that Slahi provided lodging for 3 men for 1 night at his home in Germany in November of 1999, and that one of them was Ramzi bin al-Shibh, that there was discussion of jihad in Afghanistan. Besides Ramzi bin al-Shibh, Mr. Slahi's 2 other house guests were future September 11th hijackers. Slahi claimed that it was merely a matter of hospitality to fellow Muslims. Slahi worked at various companies in Mauritania as an electrical engineer in May of 2000. After the September 11th attacks, the United States renewed scrutiny of everyone is suspected of having ties to al-Qaeda began. And on September 29th, Slahi was again detained by the Mauritanian authorities for questioning. He cooperated with the authorities several more times, and then for the last time, starting on November 20th, 2001, Slahi was interrogated by both Mauritanian officials and the FBI for 7 days. Then the CIA transported him to Jordan using extraordinary rendition. The CIA supervised his interrogation at a Jordanian prison for 8 months. Slahi claims he was tortured and forced to confess to involvement with the Millenium Plot of 2000. And on July 19, 2002, the CIA transported Slahi to Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan, where he was transferred to military custody and held at the detention facility. The U.S. military flew Slahi to Guantanamo Bay detention camp on August 4th, 2002. According to the 9/11 Commission report, Chapter 5, al-Qaeda aims at the homeland. In Chapter 1, Chapter 5, Hamburg contingent, page 1, going to Afghanistan. Quote, the available evidence indicates that in 1999, Mohammed Atta, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, Marwan al-Shehi, and Ziad Jarrah decided to fight in Chechnya against the Russians. According to bin al-Shibh, a chance meeting on a train in Germany caused the group to travel to Afghanistan instead. An individual named Khalid al-Masri approached bin al-Shibh and Marwan al-Shehi because they were Arabs with beards, bin al-Shibh thinks, and struck up a conversation about jihad in Chechnya. When they later called Masri and expressed interest in going to Chechnya, he told them to contact Abu Musab in Duisburg, Germany. Abu Musab turned out to be Mohamedou Ould Slahi, a significant al-Qaeda operative who, even then, was well known to U.S. and German intelligence though neither government apparently knew he was operating in Germany in late 1999. When telephoned by bin al-Shibh and al-Slahi, Slahi reportedly invited these promising recruits to come see him in Duisburg. Bin al-Shibh, Slahi, and Jarrah made the trip. When they arrived, Slahi explained that it was difficult to get to Chechnya at that time because many travelers were being detained in Georgia. He recommended that they go to Afghanistan instead, where they could train for jihad before traveling onward to Chechnya. Slahi instructed them to obtain Pakistani visas and then return to him for further directions on how to reach Afghanistan. Although Atta did not attend the meeting, he joined in the plan with the other three. After obtaining the necessary visas, they received Slahi's final instructions on how to travel to Karachi and then to Quetta, where they were to contact someone named Umar al-Masri at the Taliban office. Following Slahi's advice, Atta and Jarrah left Hamburg during the last week of November of 1999, bound for Karachi. Al-Slahi left for Afghanistan around the same time. Bin al-Shibh about 2 weeks later. Bin al-Shibh remembers that when he arrived at the Taliban office in Quetta, there was no one named Umar al-Masri. The name apparently was simply a code. A group of Afghans from the office promptly escorted him to Kandahar. There, bin al-Shibh rejoined Atta and Jarrah, who said they already had pledged loyalty to bin Laden and urged them to do the same. End quote. The problem is none of what I just read from the 9/11 Commission report even happened. Andy Worthington wrote in an article on his website on April 21st, 2010, the headliner, Mohamedou Ould Slahi, How a Judge Demolished the U.S. Government's al-Qaeda Claims, in which he said that 8 months in Jordan, he was flown to Guantanamo, where he was subjected to another round of torture between June and September of 2003. After which he became so compliant that, as the Washington Post reported last month, he had come to be regarded as the authorities' the most significant informant ever to be held at Guantanamo, living in his own equipped cell, where he has a television and well-stocked refrigerator and access to a garden. Despite the torture and the well-known fact that in May of 2004, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crouch of the Marine Corps, who had been assigned to his case as a prosecutor the year before, resigned rather than pursuing the case, stating that in addition to legal reasons, he was morally opposed to the interrogation techniques used on Slahi. The Obama administration, and specifically the Justice Department, was confident that it had a case. But that wasn't the case, was it? In Rasool versus Bush of 2004, the United States Supreme Court ruled that detainees at Guantanamo Bay detention camp had the right of habeas corpus to challenge their detention. Mohamedou Ould Slahi had a habeas petition submitted on his behalf. In response, the Department of Defense published 27 pages of unclassified documents from his Combatant Status Review Tribunal on July 14, 2005. The Military Commissions Act of 2006 mandated that Guantanamo detainees were no longer entitled access to the U.S. federal courts, so all pending habeas corpus petitions were stayed. However, in June of 2008, the Supreme Court ruled in Boudamine versus Bush that the Military Commissions Act of 2006 could not remove detainees' right to habeas and access to the federal court systems. All previous habeas petitions were eligible to be reinstated. After review of the case, U.S. District Judge James Robertson granted the writ of habeas corpus and ordered Slahi's release on March 22, 2010. Robertson's ruling was criticized by several Republican Party politicians. Slahi was the 34th detainee whose release was ordered by a federal district court judge reviewing government materials associated with his habeas petition. The unclassified decision was filed on April 9, 2010. Referring to the government's charge that Slahi gave purposeful and material support to al-Qaeda, Judge Robertson wrote, Slahi may very well have been an al-Qaeda sympathizer, and the evidence does show that he provided some support to al-Qaeda or to people he knew to be al-Qaeda. Such support was sporadic. However, at the time of his capture, non-existent. In any event, that what the standard approved in Bin Baha'i actually covers is those who purposely and materially support such forces in hostilities against the U.S. coalition partners. The evidence in this record cannot possibly be stretched far enough to fit that test. Judge Robinson addressed the other government allegation that Slahi was part of al-Qaeda at the time of his capture. He said the law was not clear in this instance. Neither al-Baha'i nor any other case provides a bright line test for determining who was and who was not part of al-Qaeda at the time of capture. The decision, in other words, depends on the sufficiency of the evidence. The question of when a detainee must have been a part of al-Qaeda to be detainable is at the center of the case, because it is clear that Slahi was at one point sworn al-Qaeda member. The government had to adduce evidence, which is different from intelligence, showing that it was more likely than not that Slahi was part of al-Qaeda. To do so, it had to show that the support Slahi undoubtedly did provide from time to time was provided within al-Qaeda's command structure. The government had not done so. As Judge Robinson described in his unclassified opinion issued on April 9, 2008, associations alone are not enough to make detention lawful. Although he accepted, as Slahi himself admitted, that he traveled to Afghanistan in early 1990 to fight jihad against communists, and that he swore bayat to al-Qaeda, he also essentially accepted Slahi's assertion that his association with al-Qaeda ended after 1992, and that even though he remained in contact thereafter with people he knew to be al-Qaeda members, he did nothing for al-Qaeda after that time. This was in marked contrast to the government's claim that he was so connected to al-Qaeda for a decade beginning in 1990 that he must have been part of al-Qaeda at the time of his capture. In dealing with the various components of the government's allegations, Judge Robinson's unclassified opinions contains two particularly important concessions by the government. The first is that although Slahi was originally seized in connection with Ahmed Rassam's thwarted Millennium Plot, the government now does not allege that Slahi participated in the Millennium Plot. The second, even more extraordinarily, given how Slahi has been sold to the public over the years by the federal government, is that the government now acknowledges that Slahi probably did not even know about the 9/11 attacks. Even though he was held without charge, not a single charge of being a facilitator for al-Qaeda or being involved with the Millennium Plot or being involved with the 9/11 operation, the Department of Justice appealed the decision. Oral arguments were heard on September 17, 2010 by a 3-judge panel for the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. In oral arguments, Judge David S. Tatel questioned whether swearing bayat in 1991 is evidence of actions a decade and more later against the United States. He noted, when Slahi swore bayat, the United States and al-Qaeda had a common goal. Both the United States and al-Qaeda were opposing a communist government of Afghanistan. The panel discussed sending the case back to district court or overrule the decision based on other recent DC Circuit rulings on the criteria that justified detention, which was still being developed. On November 5, 2010, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals vacated the decision and remanded the case to the DC District Court for further factual findings based on guidance it had given to the DC District Court about review of such habeas corpus cases of detainees. The District Court never held any hearings after the Court of Appeals decision. Slahi had his first periodic review board review on June 2nd, 2016. A month later, the board recommended that Slahi be released. And on October 17, 2016, Slahi was freed and returned to Mauritania after being detained without charge for over 14 years, thanks to his lawyer, Nancy Hollander, and those who worked on behalf of Slahi to get him released. The question remains whether the story about persuading members of the Hamburg Cell from Chechnya to Afghanistan ever existed in the first place. If it's true that they never traveled to Chechnya, who told them to go to Afghanistan, if at all? Were they told to travel to Afghanistan to engage in the planes operation? If so, who told them to travel there? If not, how and why did they travel to Afghanistan without being told what the purpose was to travel there in the first place?